22 years ago, a promising young man in Knoxville left home in his green Camaro to head to a studio session and vanished without a trace, leaving his family shattered in hopeless waiting. Authorities suspected his friend in the music scene, who also disappeared from sight that very night, of being involved, but with no body found, no car recovered, and only a few scattered clues, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet, through 2 grueling decades, Jordan's parents never gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Then one day, deep in the woods of Cocke County, an unexpected discovery revealed a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail powerful enough to upend the entire case and shock in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. September 2003 in Knoxville, Tennessee, carried the humid, heavy air of the South at summer's end, when the pavement in Fountain City still radiated daytime heat, and the dense rows of trees along the narrow streets occasionally swayed in the night breeze. This quiet residential neighborhood rarely saw any disturbance, with its old wooden porches, wide lawns, and low-planted fences creating a familiar suburban feel where everyone recognized each other's cars passing by. That afternoon, 21-year-old Jordan Miller had what was nearly a normal day, working from home for a few hours on unfinished tracks, eating an early dinner with family, then spending the late afternoon getting ready to head to Strawberry Plains, where he had a music session scheduled at a small studio he visited from time to time. Around after 7 p.m., he stepped out of his room, threw on his usual jacket, grabbed his keys and wallet, said goodbye to his family, and told them he'd work for a bit and be back. The moment Jordan left, that 2-story brick house quickly blended into the night rhythm as he crossed the yard, opened the door to his Chevrolet Camaro, a standout car that was also pretty familiar to folks in the neighborhood. A neighbor watering plants out front happened to see Jordan get in the car, start the engine, and drive off from Fountain City toward Broadway, the red taillights fading as the car merged onto the wider road. No one thought at the time that it would be the last they'd see of him. On the way, the Camaro seemed to appear faintly in the low-quality footage from a gas station camera on Magnolia Ave, just a dark-colored vehicle crossing the frame, with no clear license plate and no way to identify who was behind the wheel from the clip alone. Minutes later, another driver recalled seeing a similar car waiting at a red light at the Rutledge Pike intersection, a familiar traffic point for anyone turning towards Strawberry Plains in the evening. That was the last recorded sighting of Jordan on the road. As the night wore on, his phone kept ringing with no answer. By past midnight, with no sign of him returning, the family grew worried, trying to call more times, but getting no connection. The silence dragged through the remaining hours of the night, and by the next morning, when ordinary explanations, like staying out late or crashing at a friend's, no longer made sense, the family decided to call the police. As soon as the call was routed to the Knoxville Police Department's intake line, the dispatcher quickly noted the urgency and forwarded the information to the unit handling adult missing persons cases after an unusual absence. The initial report clearly listed the victim as Jordan Lee Miller, 21 years old, residing in Fountain City, a northern neighborhood of the city, with a physical description including approximately 5'11" height, slim build, short black hair, often wearing a light jacket when going out at night. The vehicle involved was a dark green Chevrolet Camaro, an older model but well-maintained, with Tennessee plates registered to the owner. In a quick information sweep, the receiving officers pinpointed Jordan's departure time at around 7:30 p.m. the previous evening, based on the home clock and consistent family accounts. His expected route was estimated along the familiar path from Fountain City via Broadway, turning onto Magnolia Avenue, then merging onto Rutledge Pike toward Strawberry Plains, where he said he had a session at a local studio. To bolster the initial details, an investigator was sent to interview the neighbor who was the last to see Jordan in the neighborhood. This person confirmed seeing Jordan walk out to the yard, get into the green Camaro, and leave at a slow speed toward the main road, with no signs of hurry or anything unusual in his demeanor. This statement matched the family's description of Jordan's normal state before leaving. From here, the investigative unit logged Jordan's departure from the neighborhood as relatively certain. During information compilation, police contacted the studio owner and Damian Cole, the only person the family said Jordan might have met that evening. Verifying the appointment involved checking phone contacts near the disappearance time and direct talks to clarify whether Jordan had actually arranged to meet Damian or just told the family that. Both sources confirmed Jordan had mentioned stopping by the studio that evening, though there was no firm confirmation he ever arrived. From the preliminary data and collected timestamps, Knoxville PD narrowed the critical time frame for cross-checking to between 7:30 and around 9 p.m. The period when Jordan left home, traveled along main routes, was faintly captured on the gas station camera, and then vanished from all traces. This was the window with the highest likelihood of the event causing his failure to return, and it served as the foundation for the agency to outline further directions to investigate why Jordan lost all contact that night. Immediately after completing the initial intake, Knoxville PD shifted to the key task of the early investigation phase, reconstructing Jordan's movement timeline in the final 24 hours before vanishing, a process requiring the collection of every smallest data fragment from scattered security cameras along the route, witness statements in the area, and any public information sources accessible in 2003. Investigators started by reviewing all traffic and surveillance cameras at intermediate points Jordan likely passed, including the Magnolia Ave gas station, areas near Broadway, and major intersections linking Fountain City to Strawberry Plains. Most cameras at the time were low quality and not continuous, but some scattered frames still allowed identification of a vehicle matching the color and shape of Jordan's Camaro. Corresponding times were logged and marked as basis for building the actual route Jordan may have taken that evening. Beyond cameras, investigators returned to the Fountain City neighborhood to re-interview those who saw the Camaro leave the area. Information from the neighbor confirmed Jordan's departure around 7:30 p.m., driving slowly through the neighborhood entrance, then merging onto the main road. This aligned with the vehicle's appearance in the Magnolia AV gas station camera, allowing the 2 points to connect into a highly reliable segment. A driver on Rutledge Pike that evening was also brought in. This person recalled seeing a similar car stopped at a red light near the intersection around 8 p.m., consistent with Jordan's direction if he was indeed heading to Strawberry Plains. When compiling everything, investigators built a detailed timeline starting from 7 p.m., when Jordan was still home, to around past 8 p.m. When the Camaro was last believed to appear on a main road, the timeline included key markers: 7 p.m. Jordan still at home. 7:30 leaves home in the Camaro. Around 7:40-7:45 appears in the Magnolia Ave area based on blurry camera images. Near 8 p.m. appears at the Rutledge Pike intersection. After that, no further recordings. All data sources up to that point were consistent in confirming Jordan left Fountain City normally and traveled the predicted route when he said he was going to the Strawberry Plains studio. However, a complete gap emerged after the Rutledge Pike intersection marker, with neither cameras nor witnesses providing any further confirmation of Jordan's continued journey. From around 8:14 p.m., his phone also stopped emitting signals, marking the point of total loss of contact with any trackable device. The phone being off or out of mobile network range prevented the agency from further narrowing location or time after that moment. In summarizing the final 24-hour timeline, investigators clearly noted verifiable markers and those only inferable, while identifying the period from 7:30 to 9 p.m. as the critical window when Jordan left familiar sight, entered intermediate roads, and then disappeared from all surveillance means. This became the crucial foundation for zoning the geographic scope and timing of likely incidents, as well as the last point cross-referenceable with witnesses to reconstruct his path the night before going missing. While the technical department continued to review camera data and solidify the timeline, the Knoxville PD's direct investigation team began the first round of witness interviews to identify individuals connected to Jordan's schedule on the night he disappeared, focusing on those mentioned in the information provided by the family. The first person approached was Damian Cole, the music collaborator, whom, according to family, Jordan planned to meet at the studio in Strawberry Plains. Damian was cooperative and showed no unusual behavior when answering questions. He said he had heard Jordan mention wanting to go to the studio to work one evening that week, but insisted there was no fixed appointment or specific agreement for the exact night of the disappearance. According to Damian, he stayed home all evening editing music for a personal project and did not meet Jordan at any point. The investigators noted the statement but also flagged multiple points for further verification because Damian's responses were quite vague and lacked clear timestamps. After Damian, the authorities worked with Ronnie Tate, the studio owner, who managed the workspace Jordan frequently visited. Ronnie said the studio closed around 7 p.m. that day, and he did not see any vehicles stop in the area after that time. He also had no appointment with Jordan and confirmed he had not heard anyone say Jordan would be coming that evening. Ronnie's statement aligned with Damian's in one key point: neither had a formal appointment with Jordan that evening. However, the fact that both denied prior knowledge of Jordan's plans created a gap that needed further verification, especially since the victim's family insisted Jordan had prepared to go to the studio and left home with that intent. The investigators continued contacting several of Jordan's friends and acquaintances to assess his mental state and any behavioral changes in the days leading up to the disappearance. A few close friends said Jordan showed no negative signs, but seemed more introspective, often focusing heavily on his music work and sometimes mentioning the need to finish a few mixes before a scheduled recording session. Another friend said Jordan had mentioned feeling pressure because work was progressing quickly, but did not specify details or hint at any particular concerns. Overall, many accounts of Jordan described him as going about his normal routine, with no mentions of serious conflicts or arguments with anyone in the recent period. To check the consistency of all collected information, the investigators cross-referenced every detail with the timeline established in the previous phase. Damian's claim of staying home all evening was compared to the time Jordan was traveling along Magnolia Ave and Rutledge Pike. Since no one could confirm Damian's location during the period overlapping with Jordan's movement, his statement was marked for additional verification. Similarly, studio owner Ronnie Tate's statement did not directly contradict the timeline, as camera data showed Jordan near Strawberry Plains, but did not confirm he reached the studio gate. This made Ronnie's claim of not seeing Jordan appear insufficient to completely rule out the possibility that Jordan turned into the studio area and then left without any witnesses noticing. Friends' opinions about minor psychological changes near the disappearance were also cross-referenced, but did not contradict the overall timeline. No one described Jordan as intending to leave Knoxville or change his daily habits, and their accounts did not create any signs that he planned to go somewhere else instead of the studio. When linking all the data, the investigators noted that although no statements directly contradicted the timestamps when Jordan was recorded on the road, neither Damian nor Ronnie provided additional information to pinpoint Jordan's final destination. This left the journey from Rutledge Pike onward as a gray area, a segment that could not be connected by any independent confirmation. The results of the first interview round only reinforced the initial part of the timeline without filling the critical gap after 8 p.m. Therefore, the authorities concluded that the initial statements, while not contradicting the collected data, also did not expand the information scope, forcing them to seek other data sources to clarify the point where Jordan left the view of both cameras and witnesses on the night before he disappeared. When the first round of witness interviews did not yield specific enough data to narrow down the trail for Jordan, Knoxville PD shifted focus to directly inspecting the location that family and friends believed Jordan intended to visit that evening, the small studio in Strawberry Plains, managed by Ronnie Tate. This was a space converted from a garage, set back on a plot between two old houses, with a narrow entrance branching off the main road in front and a wide dirt yard in the back, connecting to a lightly traveled side road. The terrain around the studio was quite secluded. An old wooden fence obscured part of the view, bushes and tall grass grew along the entrance, and limited street lighting made the area significantly dark at night. The investigators conducted a site survey by section, starting from the main entrance to determine if there were any signs that Jordan's Camaro had stopped there. They examined the road surface, looking for unusual tire tracks or disturbed soil, but the dirt and gravel in front of the studio were frequently trafficked by vehicles, making any traces hard to distinguish. A few faint tire marks were on the edge of the road, but not distinctive enough to identify the vehicle type or timing. In the area in front of the door, there were no dropped objects or signs of collision, and according to Ronnie, the studio closed early that evening, so no yard or porch lights were on. The investigation team then moved to the side lot, a narrow strip between the studio and the adjacent house, where Ronnie often parked vehicles or stored repair tools. This area had a mix of soft soil and gravel, easily retaining footprints if someone passed through in damp conditions. The investigators carefully checked the surface, but only found a few shoe prints in small and medium sizes, likely from the owner or regular studio visitors. Nothing indicated Jordan had been there. The side lot also had no cameras for image cross-referencing. Next, the team moved to the backyard, which had a wide dirt area bordering the side road behind the residential area. The backyard was poorly maintained, with tall grass and weeds covering most of the ground, creating many dark spots and natural paths formed over time by people or animals. The investigators scanned these paths for any that looked like skid marks or unusually sunken areas, signs that might appear if someone entered the area in the dark. However, there were no clear disturbances sufficient to link to the time of Jordan's disappearance. A few small trails led into the bushes, but were all very old, not suggestive of recent presence. The final area checked was the back access path, a short road branching through the backyard and connecting to a little-used dirt route. If Jordan had arrived at the studio but did not want to or could not stop long, he might have circled to the back via this path. However, the soft terrain combined with dry leaves and branches made identifying tire or foot tracks nearly impossible. There were no fresh scratches on the fence, no broken bushes, or objects indicating a vehicle had recently passed. To ensure nothing was missed, the investigators also checked areas near the trash bins, storage spots, and hidden corners in the backyard, places that sometimes reveal dropped items from visitors. Still, no objects directly related to Jordan were found. After completing the full site survey, the authorities concluded there were no clear signs that Jordan had arrived or stopped at the studio on the evening he disappeared. Although prior interviews indicated Jordan's intent to go to Strawberry Plains was reasonable, the field survey provided no physical evidence of his presence. This meant the studio could not be confirmed as the final stop, and whether he actually entered the area remained in the realm of speculation, adding another layer of doubt in efforts to determine Jordan's journey before he vanished completely that September night. After the studio survey yielded no specific traces, Knoxville PD launched an expanded search scope, focusing on two main directions based on the route Jordan likely traveled: the Holston riverbanks and the system of logging roads along the edge of Cherokee National Forest. These were areas with complex terrain, little light, sparse population, and fully capable of being sites of incidents without witnesses. The first direction chosen was the Holston River area, where Jordan's phone sent its last signal before going offline. The search team included multiple coordinated units, local police, volunteer rescue teams, and tracking dogs deployed along both riverbanks, starting from the section near Rutledge Pike and fanning out in a wide radius. Along the water's edge, they checked the most visible points like boat ramps, open dirt lots near the river, and areas right by the road where vehicles could pull over. The Holston River in September was not too deep, but had many rocky sections and thick mud in places, making underwater searches difficult. The team used probing poles and dropped cameras into deeper sections, hoping to find signs of a vehicle or personal items. However, hours of continuous scanning only yielded a few pieces of floating trash, plastic bottles, wood fragments, torn fabric, nothing related to Jordan. The absence of the car in this area made the possibility of the Camaro plunging into the river less convincing, but it could not be entirely ruled out. After the Holston River, the search team shifted eastward to the logging roads leading into the edge of Cherokee National Forest. The wood-hauling paths were often wide, but the soft dirt roads with layers of dry leaves and branches made spotting old tire tracks difficult. The terrain was mainly mixed forest with maple, oak, and pine trees, creating dense dark areas when light was fully blocked at night. Thus, if anyone entered here in the dark, the chance of others noticing was very low. The search team divided into small groups, sequentially checking potential vehicle pull-off points, clay-covered clearings, trails down to small streams, wide spots where logging trucks often turned around. Some faint tire tracks appeared scattered, but since the area had regular logging truck traffic, investigators could not confirm if the marks were from the night Jordan disappeared or another day. During the sweep, the search force found a few odd items on the ground, including a broken plastic piece, an old nylon rope segment, and a rusted metal lid. Though collected properly, these were immediately marked as unknown origin because they lacked distinctive features, no personalization, and more importantly, logging roads often had scattered trash from wood transport vehicles or forest goers. Finding these was not enough to conclude Jordan had been there, but they were still taken back for records under the principle of not overlooking any possibility. Additionally, the search team tried to determine if any vehicle had been abandoned, covered, or drifted into the brush, but found no anomalies. They checked many sunken road sections where a vehicle could get stuck or fall into a ditch, but those spots showed no fresh signs or suspicious objects. No vehicle, no collision signs, no fragments sufficient to conclude an accident occurred, or someone tried to hide a vehicle. By the end of the search wave, the report conclusion stated there was no direct evidence related to Jordan in the Holston River area, or along the logging roads near Cherokee National Forest. No car found, no body, and the collected items lacked evidentiary value. Though the search scope had expanded significantly, the results still provided no clear clues to determine where Jordan went after leaving the Rutledge Pike intersection. This left the entire journey after the 8 p.m. timestamp in a void, forcing the authorities to note that even the most viable directions did not bring them closer to clarifying what happened to Jordan on the night he disappeared. While the search teams continued scanning the complex terrain areas Jordan might have passed through, the Knoxville PD Technical Department shifted focus to another critical data source: Jordan's cell phone signals on the night of the disappearance. Although 2003 telecommunications technology had many limitations compared to the present, retrieving data from mobile base stations could still provide indirect clues to narrow down a person's movement space in the final moments. The phone was active. According to records provided by the carrier, Jordan's phone sent its last ping at 8:14 p.m., briefly connecting to a base station near the Holston River area, not far from the Rutledge Pike intersection. This was the only signal recorded after Jordan left the residential area and appeared on the Magnolia Ave camera segment, and it was the final electronic marker before the device went completely inactive. However, 2003 BTS data did not allow precise location determination, only indicating the phone was within the coverage area of that base station. This required careful interpretation, especially since the coverage radius of a BTS in a semi-urban, semi-rural area, like Strawberry Plains, was often wide and less defined than in dense urban areas with many stations. The investigators first assessed the average operating radius of the station, which ranged from about 1 to 3 miles depending on terrain and tree density. Since the area around the Holston River mixed sparse forest, open lots, and major roads, the coverage might not be perfectly circular, but elongated in favorable terrain directions, requiring the suspect area to be expanded into a rough cone shape rather than a uniform circle. Additionally, the carrier data did not record the strongest signal direction or received signal strength, making precise positioning even harder. However, The phone connecting to this BTS, rather than ones near the studio or home, helped partially eliminate areas where Jordan was unlikely to appear after 8 p.m. For deeper analysis, the technical department reviewed the list of nearby BTS, some north in Fountain City, others toward Strawberry Plains, and cross-referenced coverage based on old carrier technical documents. With Jordan's last camera-recorded position stopping at the Rutledge Pike intersection, the 8:14 p.m. ping aligned with the possibility he continued a short distance southeast, approaching the Holston Riverbank. This was seen as logical if Jordan was following the planned route to the studio. However, one point that caught investigators' attention was the short distance from the Rutledge Pike intersection to the river BTS coverage, meaning Jordan only traveled a very brief additional time after the intersection appearance. This raised the question, did Jordan truly continue the planned journey, or turn into a side area, or stop somewhere not captured by cameras? The investigators noted that the BTS could not indicate if Jordan was walking or still in the vehicle, could not determine speed, and could not distinguish if the ping came from a phone at high or low elevation. Thus, the suspect radius was marked in three main directions: the road along Rutledge Pike, the Holston Riverbank, where vehicles could stop, and open lots or side roads connecting to logging roads, all within relative BTS coverage. To ensure no key possibility was missed, the area topographic map was divided into a search grid with smaller cells, each corresponding to possible signal corridors. In each cell, investigators evaluated vehicle accessibility, tree density, and reasonableness if Jordan stopped in the dark. Additionally, the technical analysis team re-examined Jordan's phone usage habits based on call and text data. Before 8:14 p.m., the phone operated normally, but immediately after the final ping, the device no longer auto-connected to any other BTS. This indicated the phone was powered off, ran out of battery, or suddenly damaged. The signal vanishing exactly when Jordan fell off all image surveillance made the time frame from 8:14 p.m. onward a complete void. With 2003 technology capabilities, it was impossible to determine if the signal loss was intentional or accidental. From this, the authorities concluded that BTS data allowed significant narrowing of the suspect area, but could not pinpoint Jordan's exact stop. However, the time frame and area around the Holston River became the intersection of camera, witness statements, and phone signals, marking the region as the priority and the most likely place Jordan was present right before vanishing from all traces. Based on the data collected from intermediate cameras, witness statements, and the final cell phone ping in the Holston River area, Knoxville PD moved to the geographic analysis step to determine the routes Jordan might have chosen to travel from Fountain City to the studio located in Strawberry Plains. Based on the 2003 Knoxville map, three main routes formed the most reasonable choices: the Broadway-Magnolia Avenue Rutledge Pike route, the Broadway I-40 East route, then exiting onto Strawberry Plains Pike, and the secondary route along the extended Magnolia Avenue through small residential areas, then connecting to the main road near the studio location. The first route was considered the one Jordan took most often when heading to that area, starting from Fountain City, along Broadway, turning onto Magnolia, passing through a series of signalized intersections, then merging onto Rutledge Pike, where, according to the camera, a vehicle resembling Jordan's Camaro was seen. The second route, via I-40, though longer and busier, had the advantage of being faster during off-peak hours. However, this route did not match the camera footage on Magnolia Ave, which showed Jordan heading in the direction of his usual route rather than onto the highway. The third route included narrow, poorly lit sections, passing through small residential areas and some poorly maintained dirt segments, making it a less popular choice at night. When constructing the analysis map, investigators determined that the first route not only aligned with Jordan's travel habits, but also matched the specific time markers provided by the camera data. However, when piecing together all the information, the investigating agency still had to consider the possibility that Jordan might have deviated from the main route for an undetermined reason: a phone call, a sudden change of plans, a request to meet at a different location, or simply to avoid traffic, obstacles, or some traffic incident that the cameras did not capture. The possibility that he turned onto one of the small roads connecting from Magnolia Avenue to the area near Holston River, or onto a side branch leading to logging roads, was assessed as feasible, even though no direct evidence supported it. The dirt roads around the river typically had no cameras, few streetlights, and irregular maintenance, so a vehicle entering this area after 8 p.m. would be very difficult to record by any surveillance means. When analyzing the three main routes and the branching possibilities, Knoxville PD evaluated the reasonableness and risks associated with each direction. The Broadway, Magnolia, Rutledge route was the most straightforward, but both the studio owner and the friend supposedly scheduled to meet Jordan denied having a clear appointment. This created a hypothesis that Jordan might have followed the familiar route, but changed his destination before reaching the studio. The BTS ping data, near Holston River, reinforced the likelihood that he was near the main route, but did not indicate whether he continued on a fixed path. If Jordan turned onto a side branch near Rutledge Pike, that could have happened right after the camera at the intersection captured the Camaro image. These side roads connecting from Rutledge Pike to the riverbank, or sparsely populated residential areas, created a wide network of routes that made determining the actual direction extremely complex. When considering the I-40 route, although unlikely, investigators still had to cross-reference traffic flow data, incidents or anomalies on that route that evening, but no data indicated Jordan had taken the highway. The secondary route through small residential areas was also surveyed, but the lack of camera evidence or witnesses made this judgment unsubstantiated. All possibilities were documented, but no route provided specific evidence to confirm which direction Jordan chose after his last appearance at the Rutledge Pike intersection. Camera data stopped around 8 p.m., and the phone signal went dead shortly after, leaving the entire subsequent area as an information void. Therefore, instead of pinpointing a definite route, the investigation team had to keep all three routes open along with the branching possibilities. This was noted in the report as a major limitation of the geographic analysis phase, emphasizing that despite relying on Knoxville's route maps and Jordan's usual directions, no physical evidence or independent recordings were strong enough to verify any specific route as the final path he took on the night of his disappearance. When the analysis of possible routes did not yield a clear direction, Knoxville PD shifted focus back to human factors, particularly the statements provided in the initial phase to verify their consistency. Damian Cole, who was believed to possibly meet Jordan on the night of the disappearance, was invited for a second interrogation to clarify the inconsistencies previously noted by investigators. In the first session, Damian stated he was home all evening and did not meet Jordan. However, in the second session, when asked specifically about timelines and activities, Damian provided vague time markers that did not align with what he had said before. He insisted he started editing music early and stayed home all night, but when investigators requested more details about the period between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., Damian only gave general answers, lacking supporting evidence and containing segments that contradicted his own responses from the previous interrogation. This inconsistency made Damian's statement a point requiring deeper scrutiny. While working with Damian, investigators gathered additional statements from people living near his home. One witness at the end of the road confirmed seeing Damian's vehicle leave the area around 7:45 p.m., coinciding with the time Jordan was captured on camera at Magnolia Ave. The witness said he recognized the vehicle by its distinctive engine sound, which he often heard whenever Damian drove past. This immediately made Damian's home all night claim suspicious. However, since this witness could not recall the direction the vehicle took after leaving the area, the information was considered supportive but not sufficient to prove Damian met Jordan or was at a specific location during Jordan's disappearance. Concurrently, a resident near the studio provided a separate statement around nearly 8 p.m. on the night Jordan disappeared. This person remembered hearing a loud noise or a sound, similar to a short explosion from the area near the studio. The person did not see anyone or any vehicle because they were inside and did not go out to check. But the sound was strong enough to be memorable since the area was usually very quiet at night. When asked further, the witness was unsure if it was an engine noise, a car door slamming hard, or something falling to the ground, and due to the lack of direct observation, this statement was not enough to confirm the presence of Jordan or Damien at that time. Nevertheless, the occurrence of an unusual sound near the studio during the critical time frame prompted the investigating agency to note and flag it as supplementary information to consider alongside other data sources. When cross-referencing the three groups of statements, Damien, Damien's neighbor, and the resident near the studio, investigators noticed the contradictions beginning to mount. Damien firmly maintained he did not leave home, while another witness said they saw his vehicle depart the area right during the time frame. Jordan was traveling through Magnolia Ave. The person who heard the noise near the studio could not confirm witnesses or related subjects, but it occurred precisely around the time Jordan was believed to have passed the Rutledge Pike intersection. Although these statements created a notably detailed supplementary network, they were still not strong enough to bind into a seamless chain of events, proving Damien was at the studio or met Jordan on the night of the disappearance. All three sources were independent and lacked accompanying physical evidence, such as images, scene traces, or any items verifying Jordan's or Damien's presence at a specific location. Investigators noted that Damien's statement was considered less reliable than in the initial phase, but legally, this contradiction only made him a person of interest and could not immediately be turned into criminal evidence. With the available data, the investigating agency had to assess that although the second round of interrogation yielded many noteworthy details, the level of speculation from this information was still too high to draw clear conclusions. Jordan was still not recorded appearing anywhere after the Rutledge Pike intersection, and no witness confirmed seeing him enter the studio. Therefore, the contradictions in the statements were only retained as risk indicators, increasing suspicion around Damien, but not providing sufficient basis for any official determination about his role on the night Jordan vanished. In the context where field data, cell signals, and witness statements had not led the investigation to any clear confirmation point, Knoxville PD turned to examining personal factors that could create motives related to Jordan's disappearance. Since Jordan worked in independent music production and had complex relationships and collaborations, the investigating agency paid special attention to his professional interactions, particularly with Damien Cole, whom Jordan was believed to be planning to meet on the night of the disappearance. Many of Jordan's friends stated that there had been some disagreements between the two regarding the use of mixes, ownership division of works, and collaboration methods in joint projects. According to friends' accounts, Jordan had made significant progress in music production skills after spending much time working independently and was highly regarded by some local artists. This inadvertently created a gap between him and some old friends who were developing more slowly or not receiving similar attention, including Damien. Some acquaintances described instances where Jordan refused to help Damien finish a mix because he felt Damien was not prepared seriously enough or did not keep commitments on time. From this perspective, the investigating agency questioned whether competition or feelings of being left behind affected the relationship between the two. However, when gathering more statements, investigators found that any conflicts between Jordan and Damien stopped at the level of professional arguments, with no recorded physical confrontations or serious threats. Other friends of Jordan also confirmed that despite occasional disagreements, Jordan and Damien maintained contact and had collaborated quite harmoniously on many small projects. Assessing the severity of the disagreements, police noted that disputes related to music creation are common among young artists and do not always lead to extreme behavior. No one described Damien being angry enough to endanger Jordan, and there were no signs that Jordan ever expressed concern that Damien might act violently toward him. Additionally, there were no messages, emails, or records showing the two arguing intensely right before Jordan's disappearance. All data collected regarding the relationship between Jordan and Damien fell into a gray area, enough to suggest possible friction, but not enough to form a clear motive leading to Jordan's disappearance. This led the investigating agency to evaluate that although Damien had noteworthy points in his contradictory statements, the professional relationship between the two was not sufficient to conclude he had a real motive to harm. On the other hand, Jordan was described by many friends as someone with good networking skills, not prone to conflict with anyone, and always trying to maintain harmony in joint projects. This reduced the likelihood of tense conflicts leading to serious consequences. When reviewing Jordan's music projects near the time of disappearance, investigators also found no evidence of copyright disputes or financial issues that could generate negative motives. The projects Jordan participated in were mostly personal collaborations, not involving commercial contracts or revenue sharing, so financial conflicts were also ruled out. The official report notes concluded that, although Jordan and Damien had points of disagreement in music collaboration, the information collected up to this point lacked the weight to become a foundation for criminal action. There was no physical evidence, no independent statements confirming any threatening behavior or serious arguments between the two on the day of disappearance. Investigators could only note that music-related motives were not a factor that could be completely eliminated, but the persuasiveness of this hypothesis was still too low to become an official investigation direction. Ultimately, examining music motives helped supplement the picture of Jordan's relationships with acquaintances in the industry, but did not provide any specific clues supporting the determination of what happened to him on the night of disappearance. When the investigation directions based on witnesses, personal motives, and route analysis still did not yield clear progress, Knoxville PD turned to processing a central factor that could open new leads. Jordan's blue Chevrolet Camaro. In most disappearance cases involving vehicles, locating the car often allows reconstruction of the final leg or identification of where the victim stopped before vanishing. Therefore, search and investigation forces coordinated to conduct a large-scale sweep in areas where vehicles are easily abandoned or intentionally hidden. The starting point was public parking lots, temporary parking areas, rental warehouses, and vacant lots around Strawberry Plains and Rutledge Pike, where Jordan was last recorded on camera. Investigation personnel used lists of vehicle license plates in the area and cross-checked by visual inspection, as automatic license plate recognition systems were not widespread in 2003. Many parking lots were checked at different times of day and night to detect unusually long parked vehicles. However, no Camaro matched the description. Next, the investigating agency expanded the scope to abandoned parking lots or rarely visited areas where an abandoned vehicle might go undetected for a long time. Areas outside Knoxville, especially near secondary roads connecting toward Holston River and bordering Cherokee National Forest, had many old garages, dilapidated warehouses, and abandoned residential structures. Each location was manually checked: open doors, closed doors, old lock marks, peeling paint or tire tracks leading into the area. Some garages showed signs of recent vehicle movement, but none contained a vehicle matching Jordan's description. Some places held rusty old cars or those without plates, but every checked vehicle was not the blue Camaro. Beyond parking lots and garages, the search force also focused on lake and waterfront areas, particularly around Fort Loudon Lake and connecting points to Holston River. Searching for vehicles in river and lake areas required divers and basic sonar, though the technology at that time could not provide results as accurate as later generations. Underwater, many objects could be mistaken for vehicles, therefore every sonar signal had to be verified manually. The dive team checked suspicious points, areas with deep depressions in the terrain or natural slopes from the road to the water, but after many hours of searching, no trace of the Camaro was found. There were no paint fragments, no broken glass, no signs of a vehicle having strong contact with the road surface near the river. The complete absence of the vehicle in the expanded search area led the investigating agency to consider another possibility. The vehicle had been intentionally moved from the initial area or destroyed. If the Camaro was taken elsewhere by someone other than Jordan, that could be a significant sign. However, determining the vehicle's movement direction became extremely difficult in the 2003 context with no widespread traffic cameras, no automatic plate recording systems, and no witnesses confirming seeing the Camaro after the Rutledge Pike intersection segment. Much of the Knoxville suburbs had many small interconnecting roads leading to scattered residential areas or out of the city without passing any image surveillance points. This made it entirely possible for a vehicle to leave Knoxville without leaving a trace at that time. In addition to feasible directions, investigators also considered the possibility of the vehicle being hidden in forests or trails, where dense trees obscured aerial views and access was difficult for recovery vehicles. In areas like logging roads in the forest near Cherokee National Forest, a vehicle pushed deep into brush or covered with branches would be very hard to detect without direct inspection, but in the sweeps conducted, no location revealed signs of an abandoned Camaro. From compiling all vehicle search efforts, the official report indicated that the Camaro leaving no trace, not in parking lots, garages, residential areas or rivers and lakes, showed the vehicle was not abandoned randomly. Instead, the possibility that the car was deliberately relocated or completely destroyed became more prominent. This was one of the key conclusions of this investigation phase. Jordan did not just disappear, but his vehicle disappeared in a way that left the investigating agency unable to follow any physical trace. This increased the mystery of the case and added another layer of difficulty to efforts to determine what happened in Jordan's final hours on the road. When all key investigative directions failed to lead to a specific clue, the Knoxville PD was forced to confront the reality that Jordan Miller's disappearance was gradually heading toward a state of complete deadlock. Every data source had been exploited to the maximum. Witness statements did not lead to clear confirmation of any stopping point for Jordan after the Rutledge Pike intersection. The studio was thoroughly checked, but showed no signs that Jordan had ever entered the area. Routes were successively searched, but none had physical evidence supporting the hypothesis that the victim had passed through. And the Camaro, which should have been the easiest piece of evidence to find, completely vanished from Knoxville's traffic system without anyone witnessing it. No camera recording it, and no appearance in any area likely for abandoning a vehicle. In addition, mobile signal data, one of the few technical traces that technology at the time could provide, only showed Jordan in the area around the Holston River at 8:14 p.m. Then no further connections. The phone's sudden signal cutoff right after this timestamp left the investigating agency with no way to continue tracking his journey, and all analyses fell into an information void. Meanwhile, statements related to Damian Cole, most notably the time discrepancies and the witness seeing his vehicle leave the area, only reached the level of creating suspicion, but not enough to form a basis for charges or to expand the investigation in a specific direction. No witness confirmed seeing Jordan and Damian at the same location on the night of the disappearance. No physical signs from the studio proved a meeting, and no messages or direct contacts between them near the time Jordan vanished. In an overall assessment, investigators were forced to admit that no stream of information was strong enough to lead to the next step in the case. In internal meetings, many officers expressed concern that the lack of a body was the biggest barrier preventing the case from shifting to a clearer criminal investigation. No body meant no forensic tests, no determination of cause of death or confirmation that Jordan had fallen victim to criminal activity. Even under legal regulations at the time, an adult missing person case could not automatically be treated as a crime without physical evidence proving foul play. Although Jordan's family and friends continued to urge the investigating agency to expand the scope and consider more possibilities, Knoxville PD remained limited by practical conditions: no suspicious location to focus searches, no specific subject to monitor, and no new data emerging to create a breakthrough. All geographic analyses, phone signals, statements, and search activities were compiled into a lengthy report, clearly stating that the case lacked clear signs of crime and currently had no ability to expand any effective investigative steps. By early 2004, after more than 6 months of active searching without recovering physical traces, the investigating agency officially placed Jordan Miller's disappearance on the Knoxville PD's cold case list. This did not mean the case was closed permanently, but rather shifted to a passive state. to be reopened only when new clues or additional data appeared. Jordan's file was archived along with other unsolved missing persons cases in the city, with the final note from the lead investigator: final journey undetermined, loss of trace point undetermined, no body, no vehicle, no evidence of crime. Status: unable to continue investigation with current data. In the context of all leads being cut off and no further verifiable evidence, the official endpoint of the initial investigation phase was established: the Jordan Miller case, missing in September 2003. Officially became a cold file, hanging until a new piece could appear to break the prolonged silence enveloping the entire case. After Jordan Miller's file was officially placed on the cold case list in early 2004, the matter nearly fell into a prolonged state of silence, as all initial investigative efforts yielded no viable directions. However, like many other unsolved disappearances in Knoxville, Jordan's file was not completely forgotten, but continued to undergo periodic reviews according to the cold case unit's cycle. The first review took place in 2008, when Knoxville PD conducted a re-examination of a series of old cases under a new policy to check for overlooked information or consider whether new technology could assist. During this phase, the assigned investigator re-examined the entire original file on Jordan, from witness statements, camera data, maps of search areas, to traces related to the Camaro's journey. However, despite weeks of effort, comparing every detail, no new information emerged. Most of the questionable points from 2003-2004 remained unchanged. Damien's statements were unclear but lacked physical evidence against him. No technical enhancements improved the blurry camera footage, and no additional witnesses contacted after the incident. The review was thus concluded as lacking sufficient data to expand the investigation, and the file was returned to cold case status. By 2014, the cold case unit once again launched a campaign to compile unsolved cases from the previous decade, including Jordan Miller's. This time, new momentum came from Knoxville PD, being equipped with more modern forensic technology, particularly higher sensitivity DNA analysis, and the ability to process digital data from old electronic devices. However, the biggest limitation in Jordan's case, the absence of a body or any usable samples, rendered all forensic advances useless here. The scattered items found along the riverbank or on logging roads in 2003 contained no DNA or identifying traces, and most had degraded in evidentiary value over time. Image processing technology in 2014 was also applied to the Magnolia Ave camera footage, but due to the originally low quality and the interlaced frame video recording of cameras at that time, technical experts unanimously concluded the image quality could not be improved enough to confirm whether the vehicle in the recording was Jordan's Camaro or another vehicle. Witness re-interviews were also conducted. Some had moved away, some no longer remembered details clearly, and the old statements provided no additional pieces. From 2016 to 2021, the case underwent several smaller reviews, mainly by new investigators taking over the file in hopes of finding something colleagues might have missed. Some individual reports were noted, someone claiming to have seen a suspicious vehicle on the edge of Cherokee National Forest in 2003, another saying they heard someone mention seeing a green Camaro near a lake shore, but all this information lacked reliability and had no physical evidence for verification. Such calls were considered late rumors, often appearing when cases drag on too long, but most lacked investigative value. During this period, Knoxville PD, and later supporting units from TBI, also tried applying more modern data analysis techniques, such as building behavioral models or analyzing movement trends based on similar disappearances, but Jordan's case had no clear similarities to any model. No signs of robbery, no signs of voluntary departure from the city, no physical traces to analyze. Jordan's phone records, very limited due to 2003 technology, also could not yield any new information as the original data was no longer stored after many years. Investigators re-cross-checked people who had been friends or collaborators with Jordan to consider overlooked conflicts from the initial phase, but all statements were consistent with what had been recorded. Jordan had no serious issues with anyone beyond minor work disagreements, that almost anyone in the independent music field encounters. Damien, though always considered the most notable figure due to time discrepancies in his statements, still had no physical evidence linking him to Jordan's disappearance. As years passed, the common conclusion in the reviews was the same: no body, no vehicle, no suspicious location, no new evidence. Forensic technology, despite advancing leaps and bounds since 2003, still could not compensate for the lack of samples. By the end of 2021, Jordan Miller's file remained intact in the cold case unit's storage cabinet, with nearly 2 decades of no progress, entirely dependent on something the investigating agency could not create itself: the emergence of a new specific, physical, and verifiable clue to break the prolonged deadlock of the case. Nearly 2 decades after Jordan Miller's disappearance fell into deadlock and lay silent in the Knoxville PD's cold case files, a completely unexpected development occurred in early summer 2022 in Cocke County, an mountainous forested area not far from Knoxville, but with much more complex terrain. At that time, a group of local loggers was clearing and preparing to open a new logging route near the edge of Cherokee National Forest, where there had been no significant human activity for many years. On a dry, clear morning, a logger in the group was tasked with removing rotten stumps and digging out large roots to prepare the ground for high-powered cutters. When the excavator tilted the root system of a large maple tree uprooted after a storm, the thick layer of soil beneath was torn open, revealing an unusual void with soil color unlike the surrounding area. Approaching to check the reason for the strange soil layering, the worker suddenly saw an ivory-white object protruding from the damp earth. After just a few seconds of observation, he realized it was not a piece of wood or animal bone as commonly found in deep forest, but human bone. Recognizing the seriousness of the discovery, the group immediately stopped all machinery and contacted the county police. When the quick response unit from the Cocke County Sheriff's Office arrived, they confirmed that the excavated area contained not just one bone, but many human bone fragments scattered in a shallow pit eroded over time. The state of decomposition and arrangement of the bone fragments indicated the body had been there for many years and subjected to long-term natural conditions. Additionally, at the edge of the pit, authorities discovered several items mixed in the soil just flung up by the excavator. These items included a piece of dark fabric, mostly rotted but still retaining a section of stitching, a metal keychain hook with a faded circular pattern, a piece of plastic with a curved edge, similar to car interior, and a CDR disc faded but still with its outer coating, though the handwritten text on the disc surface was nearly erased by time. Each item was marked, photographed, and collected using specialized tools to avoid damaging structure or any remaining DNA. At the scene, Cocke County Police quickly sealed off the entire area around the uprooted tree, established survey boundaries, and required all unrelated personnel to leave the site to avoid disturbing traces. The terrain here was documented in detail. The area was over 300 meters from the main logging road, hidden deep in a slightly depressed section of land, with dense canopy cover making sunlight hard to reach the ground. This explained why the location had been very difficult to detect until now, especially with no reason for people to frequent it. Additionally, the loose soil structure around the large tree roots suggested the body may have been placed in a shallow pit, then completely covered by time, storms, and growing vegetation. Local investigators recorded weather parameters, soil humidity, bone decomposition levels, and root canopy displacement to estimate the time the body had been there. Though no official conclusion yet, preliminary observations indicated the body had been under the soil for at least over 10 years, consistent with disappearances from the early 2000s. When assessing the items, they determined there was a possibility this area had been used to dispose of a body, as the remote location and proximity to a logging road allowed vehicle access at night, but made detection by others difficult. After completing the sealing step, forensic experts from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation were called in for in-depth collection. Throughout the process, the area was treated as a potential criminal scene, even though the identity of the remains was not yet determined. Every bone fragment, soil sample, and item mixed in the roots was marked with precise 3D positioning and recorded in the scene report. The loggers' discovery became the first event in nearly 2 decades with the potential to break the prolonged silence of Jordan Miller's file. A set of remains found in a remote location, along with objects once buried under the soil, opening an opportunity for investigating agencies to examine the connection between this discovery and unsolved disappearances in the Knoxville area. When all the remains and evidence collected at the scene in Cocke County were transferred to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Laboratory, the modern forensic phase began to open the first specific direction that the Jordan Miller case file had not had in nearly 2 decades. Identifying the skeleton was prioritized first, because if it was not Jordan, the case would simply be another unidentified person discovery, but if it was, the entire cold case file structure would be reactivated. Although the bones had severely decomposed and the soft tissue had completely disappeared, the long bone cores, particularly the femurs, still preserved enough DNA for extraction. TBI used modern STR techniques, which are much more sensitive than the technology of the 2000s. The bone samples were compared with the DNA samples of Jordan's parents, still stored in the cold case file. The results showed a match at an absolute probability level, confirming that the remains found in the Cocke County forest were indeed Jordan Miller, who disappeared in September 2003. This was the first time since the disappearance that the file had an undeniable physical data point. After identifying the identity, the forensic team shifted to evaluating injuries on the skeleton to determine the cause of death. Although the long time had caused many bone parts to rot or detach, the skull and cervical bones were still intact enough for analysis. On the hyoid bone, experts discovered signs of fracture not caused by animals or soil pressure, but consistent with trauma from a strong impact to the neck area. Along with that, the skull had 2 extended crack positions, with spiral fracture patterns and propagation lines characteristic of a heavy blow with a hard object. These were signs that did not match natural injury patterns like a simple fall, especially since the fractures were determined to have occurred before decomposition, rather than after the body was disturbed during the excavator digging up the uprooted tree. The preliminary forensic report concluded that Jordan had suffered violent impacts to the head and neck areas before death. An important conclusion because it completely ruled out the natural accident hypothesis and strengthened the possibility that the victim was attacked. In addition to bone analysis, TBI conducted soil analysis on the evidence items and on bone fragments that still had enough surface structure to retain soil samples. The soil adhering to the bones and to the fabric piece found next to the body was analyzed for mineral composition, plant microparticles, and clay types. The results showed that the soil samples contained characteristics matching the red clay soil typical of the logging road area where the body was found. However, the most notable point came from the soil sample stuck in a plastic piece with a curved edge, a piece of evidence suspected to belong to vehicle interior. The soil adhering to this item was not entirely similar to the soil around the tree stump, but contained higher levels of kaolinite mineral and microparticles characteristic of compressed clay soil under the old logging road. About half a mile from the scene, a section of road confirmed to be where Damian Cole had carried out music equipment transport projects in the early 2000s. Although soil analysis was not enough to confirm a direct link between the evidence and Damian, this coincidence was noted in the forensic report because that location was outside the route Jordan might have taken, according to his initial intention to go to the studio. Next, the CDR found next to the remains was examined thoroughly. Although the disk surface had faded and the handwritten text was almost gone, the laboratory was still able to use special light scanning techniques to restore most of the once written lines. The results showed that the disk once had the text JM Sept 03, consistent with how Jordan usually labeled his trial mixes. When inserting the disk into a specialized reader for old media, the forensic experts extracted some audio segments even though most of the data was corrupted. The remaining audio segments were raw beats, exactly in Jordan's production style, as confirmed from old family and friends' records. This indicated that Jordan had carried that disc at a time very close to the disappearance date, further strengthening the evidence that he was working or preparing to work on a music project before suddenly vanishing. The discovery of the CDR right next to the remains was significant. It not only proved the connection between the body and Jordan's professional activities on the last night, but also matched previous descriptions that he left home to go to the studio. This was the first time a direct evidence item from Jordan's work environment was found at the body disposal site, helping to connect the time he left home and the time of his death into a seamless chain of events. When synthesizing all the forensic analysis, TBI noted that the DNA factors, bone injuries, soil composition, and data extracted from the CDR were all consistent in identifying the victim's identity, the death circumstances involving violent impact, and the possibility that the body was intentionally moved to the deep forest area. When the forensic conclusion confirmed that the remains found in Cocke County were Jordan Miller and clearly indicated signs of death due to violent impact, the entire file that had been inactive for nearly 2 decades was immediately shifted from storage status to active investigation. TBI notified Knoxville PD of this discovery, while proposing coordination with the FBI due to the long passage of time and the body disposal location being outside the city limits, requiring an investigative team capable of handling complex, prolonged, and interstate cases. A joint investigative team was quickly established, including cold case investigators from Knoxville PD, TBI's Behavioral and Forensic Analysis Team, and an FBI support group specializing in cases with large time gaps between disappearance and body discovery. The new team's first objective was to restructure the entire 2003 file by integrating the new forensic data into the old timeline, while re-evaluating every detail in the original file from a modern perspective where analysis tools and data linking capabilities had advanced far beyond 2 decades ago. The restructuring process began by cross-referencing Jordan's departure timeline again. According to the 2003 file, Jordan left Fountain City at 7:30 p.m., appeared on blurry camera at Magnolia Ave around 7:40 p.m., and may have stopped at the Rutledge Pike intersection around 8 p.m. The phone signal pinged last in the Holston River area at 8:14 p.m. When incorporating the new forensic data, especially the body disposal location and soil samples matching the logging road section not far from the scene, investigators realized that Jordan did not continue on the familiar route to the studio. Instead, somehow he left the Rutledge Pike main axis in a very short time after 8 p.m. and moved toward the direction leading into the Cocke County forest, a route he had no natural reason to choose without external influence. In the internal report analysis, the joint team concluded that Jordan was most likely lured off his normal route or made to believe he needed to turn in a different direction. A phone call, a message, a sudden meeting request, or even a direct approach on the road. Although no phone data remained, his appearance exactly in the Holston River area at 8:14 p.m. and then no signs of movement on main roads suggested a meeting point outside the original plan. When re-examining these possibilities, the team evaluated each hypothesis about why Jordan might leave the main road. In the 2003 file, Jordan intended to go to the studio to meet Damian Cole, but both Damian and the studio owner denied any appointment. However, in the new context, body found in a deep forest area, far from the studio location, the team realized that Damian's denial did not rule out the possibility that Jordan believed there was a meeting with him. Misinformation or a sudden request could cause Jordan to change destination. In particular, the discovery of an evidence item with soil matching the logging road area where Damian had frequented in previous personal projects prompted the team to start questioning whether Jordan was drawn to a meeting point outside the familiar road. TBI and FBI simultaneously reviewed all of Jordan's professional relationships because although previous music conflicts were not enough basis for motive, the body being found with the work-related CDR showed the event occurred while Jordan was actively working. This opened the possibility that professional relationships, not just with Damien, but with everyone Jordan had collaborated with, needed to be re-examined from a new angle. Who knew Jordan would bring the CDR? Who knew he was preparing a new project? And most importantly, who knew Jordan would leave home that evening? The team concluded that the most important focus was no longer on the travel route or accidental incident, but shifted entirely to the human factor, those involved in Jordan's music work and those capable of influencing his journey in the time from 7:30 p.m. to 8:14 p.m. When piecing all the new forensics, signs of violence, body disposal location, soil, CDR, into the 2003 timeline, a clearer picture began to form. Jordan left home intending to work, but instead of going to the studio, he was led off the familiar road and moved into a remote forest area, where his body was finally found nearly 2 decades later. The team agreed that this was no longer an accidental disappearance. This was a case dominated by human factors, and the first leads of the new investigation direction were clearer than ever. Jordan left the original route because he trusted someone related to his music work. When the joint team between TBI, FBI, and Knoxville PD began reviewing all witnesses related to the case after nearly 2 decades, a familiar phenomenon in cold case files appeared. The memories of many witnesses, though faded over time, became easier to elicit when they learned that the remains' identity had been confirmed. Some people, who previously held only small details not important enough to report, now began to recount more because they realized what they saw or heard could fit into the newly restructured chain of events. Investigators returned to work with Ronnie Tate, the studio owner, who in 2003 stated he heard a strange noise but could not confirm the time or nature of the noise. This time, when asked in the context of the case confirmed as murder, Ronnie recalled that the noise occurred sometime after 8 p.m., just minutes after he turned off the studio lights and prepared to close completely. Initially, he thought it was a truck passing by. But when recalling the time frame and location, Ronnie believed the sound came from behind the studio, near the logging road direction. The area the team now knew was on the body disposal road. Although the statement was still not enough to pinpoint the exact nature of the noise, it became important when matching the time Jordan lost phone contact. The team then approached another resident, living about 2 houses from the studio, who was questioned in 2003, but only said the area that night had nothing unusual. When reminded of the context, this person added that on the night Jordan disappeared, around before 8:30 p.m., he glanced out the window and saw 2 vehicles stopped near the dirt road section next to the studio, one dark-colored and one lighter-colored. He could not confirm whose vehicles they were, but remembered one of the 2 had its lights on, while the streetlights in the area were quite dim. When asked why he did not report it before, he said at the time he simply thought 2 people were exchanging something on the road, normal, in a quiet residential area with no signs of disturbance. With current data, the detail of 2 vehicles present together in the time Jordan might have left the main route became important because from 2003 until now, no witness had described 2 vehicles appearing in that area at the same time. The team continued to approach Damien Cole's neighbors, including one living across from his house in the year Jordan disappeared. In 2003, this person said he did not remember clearly whether Damien left home or not. However, in the new interview, when informed that the case had been confirmed as homicide, his memory became more specific. He recounted that on that evening, around nearly 7:50, he heard the engine sound he recognized as Damien's, a familiar sound because Damien's vehicle had a modified exhaust, louder than normal. He added that when looking out the window, he saw Damien driving away from home alone, heading in the same direction Jordan had taken not long before. This was an important detail because it was the first time creating a clear time connection between Damien's activity and the time Jordan was on the Magnolia Rutledge Pike route. Investigators continued questioning other old witnesses, hoping to find additional details to reconstruct the picture around the studio more clearly. One person who worked the evening shift at a convenience store near Magnolia Ave recalled after seeing the news about the remains being found that night he saw a dark green vehicle speeding past the store, but did not remember the exact time. Although this information was too vague to become evidence, it was still recorded to consider matches with other details that might emerge. Additionally, when talking to an elderly resident living right at the entrance to the road leading to the logging road, the team noted that she had seen vehicle lights shining into the forest that night, a detail she did not report in 2003 because she thought people going into the forest at night was normal. This time, when asked in detail, she remembered that the lights appeared only briefly and disappeared quickly, as if someone drove into the forest, then turned off the lights completely. When piecing together all the new statements, the team realized that the scattered data after 19 years could for the first time be placed next to each other to form a logical chain. Damien left home near the time Jordan passed Rutledge Pike. At least 2 vehicles appeared in the studio area in the critical time frame. The studio owner heard a strong noise from behind. Vehicle lights were seen heading into the logging road, all concentrated in the time from 7:50 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., exactly the frame when Jordan lost signal and left camera surveillance. These statements were not enough to constitute direct evidence, but were pivotal in narrowing the scope of actions of those involved on the night of September 18, 2003, while creating a time frame, though still blurry, showing that Jordan did not disappear randomly, but most likely was present in the studio area or nearby, before being taken deep into the Cocke County forest. As the joint investigation team entered the phase of synthesizing all forensic data, the reconstructed timeline, and newly collected statements after 19 years, a more seamless picture began to form, allowing the narrowing down of suspects based on the intersection of independent sources of evidence. The first data placed on the table was soil analysis. The analysis of soil adhering to the bones and physical evidence. The results showed that Jordan's body was disposed of in an area of logging road with a characteristic red clay soil composition, and more specifically, the soil sample adhering to the curved plastic piece found next to the remains matched the compacted soil at a specific road segment that Damien Cole had used in the early 2000s when transporting music equipment for small projects. This was not direct evidence of guilt, but it created the sole intersection between the geography of the crime scene and an individual who was familiar with the Cocke County forest area during a time close to Jordan's disappearance. Next, the CDR found next to the body contained raw beat tracks, matching Jordan's style and aligning with the description of the product he was carrying on the night he went missing. The appearance of the CDR with the body suggested that Jordan's final journey was directly related to musical activities, reinforcing the hypothesis that he left home intending to work and carrying professional materials. This brought the studio location back into focus, as it was the only place Jordan intended to go and where the CDR fit most contextually. From here, the investigation team continued to cross-reference statements. Studio owner Ronnie Tate stated in a re-interview that a loud noise came from behind the studio after 8 p.m., exactly when Jordan lost phone signal. Another resident saw 2 vehicles near the studio, and vehicle headlights shining onto the logging road were also confirmed by a witness living near the turnoff. When placing these statements into the timeline, they overlapped precisely with the period when Jordan disappeared from camera view and lost contact completely. In the reconstructed timeline system, Jordan was last recorded at 8:14 p.m. by a phone ping near the Holston River, just a short distance from the studio and the entrance to the logging road. This indicated that Jordan may have arrived in the area around the studio or nearby right before the signal vanished. When examining the time markers, investigators noted that the period from Jordan leaving home, appearing at Magnolia, stopping at Rutledge Pike, and completely losing signal matched the route he could have taken to meet someone at the studio or a nearby area. Meanwhile, Damien Cole's statements began to reveal clear contradictions when placed into the new data structure. He had said he was home all evening, but a witness confirmed seeing his vehicle leave home around 7:50 p.m., coinciding with the time Jordan was on Magnolia Ave, almost placing the two on the same journey, not far apart in time. This was a notable coincidence compared to the fact that no one else in the 2003 file was ever mentioned as having an appointment or plans to meet Jordan that evening. Additionally, Damien's initial statement about no scheduled meeting did not align with Jordan leaving home with the CDR and clearly telling his family he was going to the studio to work. This led to the hypothesis that Jordan believed he was meeting Damien, while Damien denied it to sever the connection. When combining the three data sources, soil, CDR, witness statements, the investigation team established three main intersection points. Jordan left home for professional purposes, appeared near the studio during the critical time frame, and the body was disposed of near a logging road area that Damien was familiar with. All pointed to Jordan meeting someone related to the studio and musical activities right in the 8 o'clock, 8:20 p.m. window. When feeding the timeline into behavioral analysis, the sole intersection meeting all three conditions, professional connection, presence per witness statements, ability to lead Jordan off his usual route, was Damien Cole. No one else in the 2003 file could connect simultaneously to the studio, logging road, and timed presence in the area where Jordan lost contact. Although there was no direct evidence, like DNA or fingerprints at the scene, the logical overlap between timeline, forensics, and statements created a clearer suspect, narrowing than ever before. The investigation team noted that every strand of circumstantial evidence, when placed side by side, converged on a single point. Damien Cole was the only one capable of luring Jordan off his standard route, meeting him at or near the studio, and having familiarity with the area where the body was disposed. This was the first time in nearly 20 years that the Jordan Miller file presented a single, cohesive investigative logic without internal contradictions, elevating Damien from a witness to monitor in 2003 to the central suspect in the case according to the investigation team's assessment. When all the pieces from forensics, timeline, and witness statements converged consistently and all pointed to Damien Cole, the federal state investigation team proceeded with the pivotal step, summoning Damien for the final interrogation, a session viewed as the opportunity for a comprehensive confrontation between investigative facts and his old statements. Right from the start, investigators focused on the key contradictions Damien had never satisfactorily explained, his claim of being home all evening, opposing the neighbor's statement of seeing his vehicle leave around 7:50 p.m. His saying did not meet Jordan and had no appointment, contradicting the logic of Jordan leaving with the CDR and telling his family he was going to the studio. And especially the 8 o'clock, 8:20 p.m. window, where Jordan vanished from cameras, lost phone signal, and multiple statements showed two vehicles stopping near the studio, coinciding with the time Damien was seen leaving home. As Damien tried to maintain his old stance, investigators shifted to direct confrontation with forensic data, which he could not easily deny. The soil sample on the evidence found, next to the remains, had a composition matching the logging road segment. Damien had used signs of trauma on Jordan's neck and skull, indicated violent impact, and the CDR at the scene, an item that could not appear at the disposal site on its own if Jordan had not contacted someone in the music circle on his final night. When asked to explain why evidence showed signs linked to an area he frequented years earlier, Damien began to fall into a passive position. He insisted, "I know nothing about Cocke County forest." Despite having previously told friends he often drove along logging roads to record natural sounds for background music, investigators presented an old note from an acquaintance who had worked with Damien, circumstantial evidence, but enough to break the denial. When pressed to explain leaving home at the exact time Jordan was traveling on the Magnolia, Rutledge Pike route, Damien only responded vaguely that he went out for a bit, but could not provide a specific location or reason. This marked the first crack in his statement. The interrogation grew tense as investigators moved to the disposal issue. They asked why Jordan's body appeared in a remote location that only those familiar with logging roads would know how to access at night. Why the CDR, something Jordan carried that evening, lay right next to the remains, and how the trauma signs on the bones could be explained if there was no conflict as Damien had claimed. Initially, Damien continued to deny any involvement, but when investigators presented the reconstructed timeline diagram with all matching intersections from him leaving home, the appearance of two vehicles near the studio, the noise after 8 p.m., to the body discovery location, Damien began to waver and change his demeanor. After hours of continuous questioning and inability to refute the forensic data, he admitted being at the studio area that evening and meeting Jordan, completely contradicting his statements over nearly 2 decades. Though still denying intentional murder, Damien admitted that a scuffle occurred. Jordan fell and hit his head, and out of panic, he put Jordan's body in the car and drove to the logging road to hide it. He claimed he had no intent to cause death, but simultaneously confessed to deliberately disposing of the body and discarding the victim's items to avoid detection. This statement, though not a full confession, was the first time Damien accepted direct responsibility for moving the victim's body, an action that could not be explained by a normal accident. After obtaining the statement, the federal state investigation team proceeded to obtain an arrest warrant based on the admission of disposal, severe contradictions in statements over 19 years, forensic data proving the body was moved, and the forensic timeline, witness logic chain, all leading to Damien Cole. A few days later, Damien was arrested in Sevierville, Tennessee, while at a relative's home. He was taken into custody without resistance, but offered no further explanation. The initial charges included abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and felony homicide. The arrest of Damien Cole marked the biggest turning point in the Jordan Miller file since 2003, the first time a suspect was taken into custody based on a complete, tightly linked, and irrefutable evidence structure. The trial of Damien Cole began in late 2022 and extended into the early months of 2023, marking the final phase of a file that had been frozen for nearly 2 decades. From the opening days, the Knox County courtroom attracted significant attention from the press and public, as it was the first time forensic evidence, timeline data, and witness statements were presented publicly in a seamless structure. A structure that investigative agencies had taken nearly 2 decades to perfect. The prosecution opened by presenting the most critical forensic results: DNA, confirming the remains as Jordan Miller; analysis of neck and skull bones, showing trauma from external force; soil analysis proving the body was moved and buried in a logging road area Damien frequented, and the CDR containing Jordan-style beats found right next to the remains. The prosecution emphasized that these were not isolated pieces of evidence, but parts of the same chain of actions, clearly showing Jordan left home to work in music, met a familiar individual, was led off his normal route, and never returned. Next, the prosecution presented the journey map, a mapping combining camera data, witness statements, and phone pings, simulating Jordan's final recorded minutes alive. When the diagram was projected on screen, the jury could see the alignments between points. Jordan left home at 7:30 p.m., appeared on Magnolia Ave at 7:40 p.m., was near Rutledge Pike around 8 p.m., lost signal in the Holston River area at 8:14 p.m. And just minutes later, a witness heard an unusual noise behind the studio. The prosecution asserted that Damien was the only one present in this time-space according to neighbor statements and informal records from the residential area around the studio. One of the most crucial parts of the trial was when the prosecution released Damien's admission from the final interrogation, in which he confessed to moving Jordan's body and disposing of it in the logging road area. Though Damien denied actively causing the death, the prosecution argued that the confession to body disposal proved he was at the scene, directly involved in Jordan's death process, and the act of hiding the body constituted a crime even if he tried to describe it as an accident. The defense attempted to counter by arguing that Damien's confession was made under stress, that he was under psychological pressure, and that forensic soil was not strong enough individualized evidence to convict. They argued there was no DNA or direct traces of Damien at the scene, no camera capturing the moment of contact between the two, and no witness seeing the conflict occur. However, the prosecution was thoroughly prepared for these counter-arguments, presenting multiple forensic experts and behavioral analysts to explain why consistent circumstantial factors hold significant value in a long cold case where direct traces often vanish over time. One forensic expert explained that soil analysis cannot identify a suspect, but can confirm location and action, and in this case, moving the body to a specific soil area was nearly impossible by coincidence for someone unfamiliar with the region. A timeline expert pointed out that the appearance of two vehicles near the studio, Damien's departure time, and Jordan's signal loss created a suspicious matching pattern with no reasonable innocent explanation. One witness near the studio recounted the unusual noise after 8 p.m. Another described vehicle headlights shining into the logging road, as if someone drove into the forest and turned off the lights. This chain of statements, when combined, created a continuous path for the jury. By the deliberation day, the jury considered all factors: forensics proving violence, forensics proving disposal, timeline proving Jordan did not leave the route naturally, neighbor statements proving Damien left home at the right time, and Damien's confession to moving the body. Though there was no direct evidence, like DNA or camera capturing the act, the circumstantial links connected so tightly that the jury concluded there could be no more reasonable explanation than Damien Cole being responsible for Jordan Miller's death. In the end, the court found Damien guilty of felony homicide, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. For felony homicide, the charge applied when the victim dies during the defendant's commission of another felony. Damien was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for the first 51 years under Tennessee law. For tampering with evidence, the defendant received an additional 12 years, and for abuse of a corpse, 2 years. The sentences were consecutive, ensuring Damien would spend most of his remaining life in state prison. This was not just a verdict for a case frozen for nearly 2 decades, but also an official affirmation that Jordan did not vanish. He was murdered, and the person responsible finally faced justice. The Jordan Miller case, from the night he disappeared in September 2003 until the sentence for Damien Cole was handed down in 2023, was a 2-decade journey combining initial failures, years of deadlock, and breakthroughs from modern forensic science. From the first hours Jordan was reported missing, Knoxville police faced a puzzle with almost no data, no body, no vehicle, no clear cameras, no direct witnesses, and no physical traces showing he reached his destination. His phone signal cut off abruptly at the Holston River, his blue Camaro vanished completely, and no one could confirm if Jordan made it to the studio. In the context of 2003's limited technology, the vague timelines prevented the case from advancing, and after just 6 months, the file was shifted to cold case status due to lack of crime evidence. Throughout 2004-2021, the case was reviewed multiple times, but yielded no results. Re-interviews of witnesses uncovered no new information, and although forensic technology advanced, it could not be effectively applied without samples or the victim's vehicle. The Jordan Miller case became a typical example of files frozen due to lacking forensic foundation from the start. No body, no scene, no definitive evidence. However, in 2022, an unexpected development changed the entire picture. A logger in Cocke County accidentally unearthed roots and discovered remains along with evidence under deep soil, opening the first opportunity to determine Jordan's fate. Modern DNA forensics confirmed the victim's identity in just weeks, something impossible in 2003. Soil analysis proved the body was moved. Soil on evidence matched a logging road segment linked to Damien Cole, and skull-neck bone analysis showed clear trauma from external force. The CDR found next to the body confirmed Jordan carried his music product on his final night, aligning with what he told his family, going to work at the studio. These data, when fed into the old timeline, reconstructed the journey that no investigator could previously pinpoint. The discovery of the remains not only answered where Jordan had been, but more importantly, provided the first fixed point after nearly 2 decades, a real coordinate to piece together all remaining data. From there, as the federal state team re-interviewed Ronnie Tate, residents around the studio, and Damien's neighbors, their memories were triggered, and small pieces of information began to emerge. 2 vehicles near the studio, headlights into the logging road, noise after 8 p.m., Damien's departure time, all aligning with Jordan's disappearance window. When combining forensics, timeline, statements, the sole logic leading to Damien Cole became so clear that no other reasonable explanation remained. The 2022-2023 trial was the final step, confirming that logic structure, forensics proving violence and disposal, timeline proving opportunity, Damien's statement proving presence at the scene, and the entire event chain leading to the final verdict. The factors that prolonged the case for 2 decades, lack of body, weak technology, vague statement data, were ultimately overcome by the combination of scientific progress, revived witness memories, and the federal state team's restructuring of the entire file in a way impossible in 2003. Solving the case not only brought Damien Cole to justice, but also closed one of Knoxville's longest missing persons files, giving the answer Jordan's family had waited 19 years for, and affirming the irreplaceable role of modern forensics in illuminating cases seemingly buried by time. The Jordan Miller case reflects a profound reality in contemporary American life. Despite societal advances in technology and communication, gaps in surveillance, remote areas, and complex personal relationships can still create unforeseen tragedies. In the story, Jordan vanished in just the time from 7:30 to 8:14 p.m., a very short window, but enough for him to be lured off his familiar route and taken into the Cocke County forest, where there were no cameras, no witnesses, and no traces found for 2 decades. This is a reminder that even though life today seems safer, small moments of incaution can still lead to great danger, especially in professional or social relationships we trust too easily. Another key detail is that Jordan left home intending to work, carrying the CDR with his music product, showing he believed that evening was a career opportunity. However, the person he trusted was the one who led him into danger. This underscores the importance of properly assessing relationships, especially in creative or business environments where the line between collaboration and competition is sometimes thin. Another lesson comes from the case, dragging on nearly 20 years simply due to no body and no suitable forensic technology in 2003. By 2022, advances in DNA, soil analysis, and exploiting small evidence like the CDR broke the deadlock. This reminds us that science, though advancing daily, only realizes its value when we proactively protect data, store information, and are transparent with investigative agencies and incidents. Finally, Jordan's story is a reminder to the American community that personal safety depends not just on technology or police, but also on being cautious in relationships, sharing plans with trusted people, and always being aware that a small decision at night can change an entire life. Thank you for following the nearly 2-decade case-solving journey of Jordan Miller. If you want to continue accompanying true investigation stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring cases that seemed buried by time but ultimately found the truth.